So you're under contract to purchase your new home and you just received the appraisal report. However, the value came in $30,000 under the contract sales price. What are you going to do now? Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another episode of More About Mortgages. My name's Ian Moore and I'm a loan officer here at Premier Mortgage Lending, licensed to originate all residential home loans in the states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and Florida now. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about low appraisals or under appraisals, as we've seen across the board pretty steadily and regularly here lately in the mortgage lending business, because it is a needed change in this business. We have seen throughout last year, all of 2020, appraisals come in at the sales price almost every time with consistency. And with these overinflated values and these houses selling for $100,000 more than asking, we can't just be having these appraisers go out and appraise the subject properties at the sales prices without doing their due diligence. So that's what they've begun doing. And I knew it and saw a trend starting probably in February or March earlier of this year, where appraisers started doing more due diligence and putting these appraisal reports together that were coming in almost regularly under value, which again, at the time is not the ideal situation. You know, if it comes in at sales price, that enables us to move forward as is and not really have to put a wrench into the mix or make any adjustments or amendments. However, on a big scale picture, you know, it is a good thing because these lower appraisals are going to bring the economy and the market back down to a more realistic place instead of having these houses, you know, valued and appraised significantly higher than what they're actually worth. Because what happens is when a house appraises at $650, even though it's technically only worth around $500,000, all of those neighboring homes see an increase in their home value as well because of that appraisal of that subject property. So that high appraisal has now created an inflation of their entire neighborhood with the home sales and the home values. So if that happens on a countrywide basis, we're going to be looking at all these homeowners living in houses with loans that are way too high compared to what their house is actually worth, meaning there will be more than half the country underwater owing more on their mortgage than their home is worth, which I can tell you right now, guys, if the bubble hadn't burst yet, by that point, it would certainly be bursting very soon, and we'd be into another economic collapse. So appraisers started doing more due diligence. We've started seeing more low appraisals, which leads me to doing this episode of More About Mortgages and providing you guys with your options as to what the heck you're going to do now that your appraisal just came in $50,000 light. So I'll start with, in a typical market, typical times, I'll even say pre-COVID times, if an appraisal for a $400,000 purchase came in at, say, $380,000, what would really happen was that the seller's agent would negotiate with the buyer's agent, and the seller would end up dropping their sales price down to the appraised value of $380,000 because they're not going to get any more for their house than what it's worth. So that same house selling for $400,000 appraises at $380,000. Where pre-COVID times, that seller would ultimately drop the sales price down to $380,000. Now they have more liberty to do pretty much anything they want, as far as if they want to keep that sale price at $400,000, although the appraisal came in at $380,000, they can do that in today's market because there's so much demand that there's going to be a buyer out there willing to pay that $400,000 for the house, even though the appraisal came in at $380,000. They'll gladly pay $20,000 more for that house. So again, where the seller would drop the sales price down to $380,000 pre-February of last year, that's not really happening anymore, and we're seeing a negotiation take place between the buyer side and the seller side to negotiate on an updated or new sales price. So if it appraised at $380,000, original sale price was $400,000, most times we're seeing it stay at $400,000 and the buyer need to bring that extra $20,000 to closing. If they can't, that deal falls apart. The house gets relisted, a new buyer comes in and is able to pay that $20,000 over the appraised value directly to the sellers at the closing table. The options really come into play when you make your offer and go under contract in the first place. You have a conversation with your agent about how you want to structure your offer so that if the offer is for $400,000 purchase price, you put it in there. If the house appraises, as low as $380,000 or higher, we'll pay the extra money to closing to bring up to that $400,000 sale price. Meaning, if it appraises at $380,000, in between $380,000 and $399,000, you'll still pay $400,000. If it appraises at $379,900 or below, you'll renegotiate the sales price with the sellers. something like that. Meaning you look at your assets, see how much assets you have and how much reserves you have. So after the money you'll need at closing, how much money will you have left over in liquid assets, and determine if the appraisal comes in light, will I have assets to cover that additional cost to the sellers? If not, then you don't want to put something like that in the contract and in your offer stating you'll pay up to $400,000 even if it appraises as low as $380,000, because you don't have assets to do that. However, if you do have assets to do that, it is a super strong incentive for sellers to accept your offer with, because they now know that even if that appraisal value comes in light, that they're going to get recouped and they're going to get made whole, because they'll get that $400,000 sale price no matter what. So work with your buyer's agents, guys, on the front end, after, before you've submitted your offer, while you're submitting your offer. Figure out with your lender how much reserves you have, how much liquid assets you have in reserve to apply towards a low appraisal if the appraisal ends up coming in light. However, the best way to avoid all this, guys, is put 20% down, have good credit scores, and get a property inspection waiver or a PIW. That way, you can figure out with your mortgage lender ahead of time, meaning before you even submit your offer, that you'll get a property inspection waiver at an offer price of, say, $400,000 for this particular example. That way, you can submit an offer to those sellers with a $400,000 offer, knowing full well that you have an appraisal waiver involved in that offer. That seller's agent would be crazy to accept another offer. In fact, the only other offer that they would accept over that should be a full cash offer, because that way the seller knows that they don't need an appraisal. They're not going to have to get an appraisal. No issues are going to pop up, or repairs that might need to get done will come to the woodwork or the forefront, and ultimately they're going to get whatever they want to get for that house. So if they're selling for $400,000 and they're not willing to budge off that number, they don't have to worry about it at all, because they know that buyer that they're accepting the offer of has a property inspection waiver at that sales price. So ultimately, guys, if you're a home buyer out there, my top advice is get a good buyer's agent, a reputable buyer's agent that knows what they're doing, that works in real estate full time, because in this market where there's so much demand but such little supply, you need a team of professionals around you to help give your offers the best chance of being accepted. And it's more than just writing a letter nowadays, guys, because you need to show the sellers that you'll have the assets to cover if your appraisal comes in light, and that ultimately you're a strong, motivated buyer that's not going to walk away because, the inspection that you got showed the words knob and tube in the electrical section. So if you guys have questions, feel free to reach out, leave a comment. Please like and subscribe to my page. I'd really appreciate that, guys. And thank you for watching another episode of More About Mortgages, guys. This has been on under appraisals in today's market. Thanks for joining me.